Welcome everyone. So this is going to be a little bit of a different sort of video. Therefore, if you enjoy the video, if you like content like this, please leave a like. Not only is that a free way to support the channel, helps out with YouTube's algorithms and all that stuff, but it also tells me directly if this sort of content is helpful, appreciated, useful, or any of those things, because it's outside of what I usually do. Usually I'm teaching about economics. In this video, in some sense, I'm teaching about how to be a good student of economics and how to write, in this particular video, an economic analysis paper. Though this is useful for responding to an economics discussion board prompt, and though I've got this geared towards a microeconomics example, you can make the necessary adjustment to think about how this would go in a macroeconomics course as well. So, without further ado, what I'm interested in doing here is talking about how we would go about writing an economic analysis paper. And usually, what we'd have in mind for one of these papers is we want to see you showcasing your ability to think like an economist, right? You want to see your own economic reasoning. We don't want to see a whole lot of textbook boilerplate type stuff. We don't want to see a whole lot of just, copy pasting or even like direct quotes that are even cited and so on and so forth. We're interested in your economic reasoning. In particular, being able to apply concepts from class. And so to that end, what I'd say is probably the best thing to do, firstly, before you go too far, is make sure that you understand clearly, precisely what's being asked of you by that discussion board or by that assignment. It's a paper assignment. You don't want to put in a whole bunch of work. It turns out that you've been working on a different paper than what's been assigned, right? So even small lines, like be sure to read through everything at least twice so you know like exactly what we want you doing in that paper, right? That's really crucial. So I'd say, yeah, at least twice, make sure you know precisely what's being required. Then, if it's the type of paper where you're supposed to be, or discussion board prompt, or whatever, where you're supposed to be responding to a current events article, make sure you find a really good current events article, right? Be sure to use an actual news article and not a study site. And so, for instance, you don't want to use something like lumenslearning, or Sailor, or investopedia, econhelp, anything like this. It is essentially a study site or a proxy for your textbook, right? Rather than citing any of those things, you'd want to cite the textbook from the course. And then also, these are not current event articles, and so this would just be giving you more textbook boilerplate and wouldn't be helping you supply an example to then analyze. Instead, what I like doing is I would say, use Google, search up on Google using the News tab to find an article, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. Once you've got a suitable article, write down a list of 2 to 3 economic concepts from the course that you can apply, right? The goal is you want to write an economic analysis paper, so you want to think of what are some ideas from the class that you're going to be able to apply? What are things that are resonating with you that you can apply to that example? And then that's what you're writing about, right? We want to showcase your own economic reasoning. So I'd write down a list of 2 to 3 economic concepts that, as part of your outline before you even start writing. If it turns out you're struggling to find 2 or 3 natural concepts to apply, I would choose a different article, right? Oftentimes these assignments are open-ended. You might as well be friendly to yourself, right? Set yourself up for success. Pick a good article. Pick one where you're going to have lots of things you can write about. Then as you're starting the writing process, after reading through the article carefully, I would write down a list of the passages that you're going to be using either as direct quotations. You actually honestly probably don't want to do that. Or that you'll be paraphrasing. Now, I say, okay, direct quotations, you probably don't want to do that. Why? Well, firstly, if you include a direct quotation, it's going to kind of break up the flow of the writing, right? And so if you're doing that, there's going to be additional costs imposed on yourself as a writer to make this thing coherent, and then on your reader. So, therefore, whatever you're directly quoting has to justify that higher cost, which means it's got to be really good. So the rare cases that I can think of is if you're responding to something that somebody else has said or written, and then you're going to respond directly to their words, so you need them verbatim, or if it's like an important sort of motivating, not in the sense of like motivational speaker, but like motivating introduction sort of quote. If it's something central to what you're writing about and it's from like, a recognizable speaker, that might be worth including as a direct quote, right? If you need exact, precise facts and figures, that'd be another thing. Otherwise, in almost all other cases, you should be paraphrasing. Matter of fact, other things equal, when I'm reading through a student's paper, it's probably better to assign a better writing if they're just paraphrasing, right? As soon as you start seeing a lot of direct quotations, lots of times it's going to indicate a sort of weaker writing style. You're resting on something else that you're bringing in, and it may or may not kind of match with what you're trying to construct. And so it just kind of lowers the quality, lowers the value of what you're producing. And so I wouldn't do that. I would just paraphrase. There's also a lighter citation convention where you paraphrase anyway. Then step 5, write your paper. Include all the appropriate in-text citations. Make sure to revise and proofread. For citations help, I recommend referring to Purdue's online writing laboratory, the Purdue OWL, right? In particular, the reference guide for the list of electronic sources would probably be most useful in this day and age because you're almost always going to be citing a digital source. Yeah, they've got a different citation convention for like a print book or something like that. I've got this called up for like APA, but there's also a guide for MLA. Just go to Google, type in Purdue OWL MLA electronic sources, and you'll be all set. All right, so like I said, I'm going to actually do an example here, though. The example is on Tesla, because that's a common one that comes up a lot. And so what I did to kind of demonstrate this, oh, and by the way, like I did this whole process, I did this whole thing in about 30 minutes. So, this didn't take a whole lot of time, didn't take a whole lot of work, and part of that's because, I've been doing this kind of a long time. But that said, like, I think one of the kind of important lessons for you, though, is like, give yourself a good structure to work within and be focused. I think that's where kind of a lot of time wasting comes, and you kind of like spin your tires a lot because you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing. So I'd say like use a structure like this and just kind of follow this algorithm to go through like writing your paper, and then it'll kind of fall into place. That's what I would recommend. Anyway, so I searched up supply and demand and then Tesla on Google. The fourth result was the most interesting. It was called Elon Musk calls Tesla prices embarrassing, blames inflation. So let me show that to you. So here's my search. I just said supply and demand Tesla, and I read the first couple titles. I'm like, okay, these are interesting. Oh, but then I saw prices are embarrassing, blames inflation. And so I thought, oh, this might give me something interesting to talk about. So I clicked through, found the article, and then I read through, right? So what this article is going to do is it's going to pull in kind of a whole bunch of quotes from Elon Musk that the author, Stephen Loveday, is responding to, or kind of editorial contextualizing. Anyway, so I read through here, and I was looking to see, is there going to be enough mention of stuff where I can insert my own economic reasoning? I don't want to take the economics from the article, right? Matter of fact, like lots of times a journalist will get things wrong, right? And so, for instance, right down here, what does it say? We're talking about, where did I see this? Paragraph 6, because I cited it. It said, if Tesla reduced its prices, more people would order vehicles. That would just make the situation worse. I guess this actually isn't incorrect. The idea is we don't want to just call this a change in demand. How would you recognize this? Oh, if you'd taken a principles of micro course, you'd say if there's a change in price, right, more people ordering vehicles, that's an increase in quantity demanded, right? This is just an application of the law of demand. So anyway, as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, cool. There's a lot of things that I'm going to be able to bring in. This is indeed going to be a suitable article for me to be able to write about, right? So anyway, as I was going through here, before I got any further, I was like, I'm going to write down the citation because I know I'm using this article. Let's just get the citation out of the way, right? So maybe you even saw in there, I don't have APA memorized. I don't know. What I always do is I just go to the Purdue OWL site, right? And I go and find how to do my citations, right? I figure out how to do the longer form citation. I've got this largely memorized. Yeah, I do. But, I checked back real quick just since I was giving us this link. And what's the one that I wanted to look up? Oh, how to do a direct quote for a situation where there's no page number, because I never use direct quotes, but I thought I should give you at least one example of where a direct quote might not be inappropriate. Anyway, so I went through the article. I found the key passages that I want to cite or paraphrase. One was Tesla raising its price several times during 2022. Elon Musk admits prices are embarrassingly high. That was not a direct quote. That was something that I pulled from this first line right here, right? So where did I see this? Yeah, so talking about raising the prices. It was these two sentences, right? So I was taking kind of the theme of those two sentences. Oh, and I just closed out my paper, didn't I? That is embarrassing. And seems to fit that I put my embarrassing face right there. Cool. I was going to use that later, but now I guess I just pranked myself. Whatever. So, all right, cool. I'm not going to edit that out. I was going to make that so much cooler. And then joke's on me. Anyway, so right, what was I doing here before I lost the train of thought? Yeah, so I was showing how that was not a direct quote, and I was just paraphrasing that down. Here's another thing. I don't want to risk that happening again. So I saw Elon Musk believes it to be a supply and production issue rather than being caused by demand problems. I'm not citing Musk. I'm citing Loveday here, right? It's paraphrasing what Loveday said because it wasn't a Musk quote. At least what I was writing about wasn't the Musk quote. And then I do have a direct quote. Loveday observes, if Tesla reduced its prices, more people would order vehicles. That would just make the situation worse, right? And then I said, yeah, this is an application of the law of demand. At lower prices, there's a higher quantity demanded. So here's the direct quote portion, and then here's what I'm going to say about it. So I just arranged these 3 things before I even start writing. Then what I went to do is I grabbed all the other economic concepts I was going to talk about. And honestly, I had this in the back of my mind as I was like writing this already, or reading through already. I kind of knew what I was going to talk about in the paper, but definitely supply and demand model, especially law of demand. Comparative statics, right? Because if there's a decrease in supply, that's going to, other things equal, be a recipe for an increase in price. I can talk about substitutes in consumption, consumers swapping out gas-powered vehicles for EVs. I can talk about substitutes in production. That'd be like Tesla choosing about whether to direct batteries into the new Cybertruck that they mentioned in the article versus like the Model S or something. And then I can talk about inflation. Now, inflation's not a microeconomic concept, but I wanted to clarify the macroeconomic reasoning of inflation here, especially maybe as you're watching this, maybe you want guidance on how to write a macro paper, and so I kind of talked about inflation a little bit down there anyway. Okay, so let's go through, let's write the paper. Here's my paper. So, boom, wrote this in like, I don't know, probably 15 minutes. So here's the paper. I don't know. I'll show you the paper. Maybe I'll just like read through it, I guess. You can see my economic reasoning, and then there's the references. Right, so this is just 2 pages, right? So that's why it's so short, of course. But you know, you think about exactly what the assignment's going to require, and you kind of expound on what you're introducing. But anyway, just to think about like how I'm incorporating the economic analysis, because that's what we care about here. So I started off, I'm saying Tesla raised prices several times during 2022. Elon Musk admits prices are embarrassingly high. And then I say, yeah, economics can help us understand the business environment currently faced by Tesla. Ordinary supply and demand model doesn't perfectly apply to the model or market for EVs. On the grounds that the model assumes perfect competition, it can offer useful insights. And that's true. Supply and demand model assumes we have many buyers and many sellers. We have a competitive market, right? That was the implicit assumption. Turns out that's not what we have for EVs or for Teslas for sure, right? They've got some degree of market power. It's actually a little bit closer to an oligopoly, or if we want to argue that Tesla's got a monopoly, that's less tenable today than it was, like 10 years ago. But anyhow, so probably an oligopoly model is going to be most useful, certainly something with market power. Nevertheless, we can still apply the supply and demand model and get some insights from it, and I'm going to do this here, right? All right, so the demand for electric vehicles is comprised by the individuals potentially in the market for EV. Gas-powered vehicles are a substitute for electric vehicles, so fuel prices rise. We expect a decrease in the quantity demanded of gas-powered vehicles and an increase in demand for the substitute good EVs. Model this as a rightward shift the demand for EVs. Okay, I've got a writing error. I should probably have introduced EV before I started using it a lot, so I should have probably put EV in parentheses right here, right? What I would do for like a final draft is I'd actually include the pictures. I would just sketch out, I made this in Apple's Pages, and that's what I used to make my lecture notes. And so I could make graphs to show this rightward shift of the demand for EVs, and in particular, the impact on the market price and the market quantity. Then I say, oh, Elon Musk believes this can be a supply and production issue rather than being caused by demand problems. Indeed, higher input prices lead to a decrease in supply, model with a leftward shift. See here, I'm talking about just giving the analysis. Notice I'm applying directly. This is a supply shifter. I didn't include any textbook boilerplate type stuff. I didn't define an increase in supply. I just said, hey, look. Higher input prices, this is a supply shifter that's going to lead to a decrease in supply, model that with a leftward shift to the supply curve. Other things equal, this is a recipe for an increase in the price of EVs, decrease in equilibrium quantity, right? Then I kind of continue on here. I talked about this application of law of demand. Then I wanted to be able to talk about substitutes in production. So I said, Tesla's got to make decisions about what else to produce. They produce several vehicle models, largely the same components. Each model is a substitute in production. So if the price of one model rises relative to another, Tesla's going to redirect those resources from whichever is going to have the now relatively lower price to whichever is going to have the now relatively higher price, right? So my example was when the Cybertruck gets increased or it gets introduced, there's going to be probably a lot of people willing to pay a lot of money for the Cybertruck relative to the other models. Okay, good. So now that makes the Cybertruck way more lucrative. So why would you put a battery in the model, I don't know, X or Y when you could just put it in a Cybertruck and somebody will pay more for that battery in a Cybertruck than they would in a Model Y, right? So that's the idea. It's the opportunity cost of using resources for one use rather than another is what comes to the forefront when we're analyzing substitutes in production, right? So the price of an increase in the price of a substitute in production will decrease the supply for the good under consideration, right? So an increase in the price of the model, a decrease in the price of the Model Y relative to the Cybertruck would increase our supply of the Cybertruck. We'd place the batteries in the Cybertruck instead. And then I was talking about inflation. So can we blame the higher Tesla prices on inflation? Interestingly, right, inflation refers to an increase in the average price level, reflected by measurements, changes between values in the consumer price index or producer price index or some other price index. So it's actually not inflation if Tesla raises the price of the Model S. It's just an increase in the market price, right? Because we're just thinking about like the market for that particular vehicle. However, that vehicle is sold in the economy and it's going into contributing towards the basket of goods that people are buying that gets measured as part of inflation, right? And so, yeah, increase in the price for Model S contributes to inflation when it joins a collection of other prices in the economy that are also rising. Also, general inflation could be reflected in the increase in the prices of inputs used to produce that thing, therefore leading to the increase in the price, right? So, actually, price increases in those markets, we'd also think of individual price increases as not directly inflation, but instead contributing to inflation, right? Because when there's inflation, we expect prices on average to be rising, which could potentially create upward pressure on the price of any individual good or service in the economy. So in that sense, the price increase that Elon Musk observes could very well be part of an inflationary trend. Right, and then here's my reference. Okay, so I didn't mean to make this like a perfect paper because I'm writing it for myself and just for this video. If I was going to write this for publication or submission or something like that, this is just a single draft and I didn't revise it. Secondly, I'd probably have to include the graphs that I'd had mentioned, or probably better yet, probably place those in an appendix and then reference them in the body of the paper. One important writing tip is, if you're going to be including some type of figure or table or graph in your paper, don't just like drop that in the center of the paper and then be done with it. Instead, no, you should actually probably put a lot of those things in the appendix unless it's featured in the forefront of the argument that you're making. Like, do you need this picture because you're talking about this picture or this table as exactly what you're developing? If so, yeah, leave it in the body. Otherwise, put it in the appendix, and I might just put it in the appendix anyway. Either way, in the body of the paper, you should thoroughly describe what's happening in that table or the graph or the figure, right? You shouldn't leave that up to guessing. It's really important that you and your reader are on the same page, or at least the reader understands what point you're trying to make from any graph or table or figure that you're including, right? Because they might come to a different conclusion. They might disagree, right? And so you should let them know exactly why you're including that thing in your paper, what's the lesson that they're supposed to take away. And matter of fact, other things equal, you should, like when I'm reading through these papers, student writes, paragraph describing what the table is going to be. I actually shouldn't have to look at the table. I should know on the basis of the paragraph that you've written, like what's going to be in the table when I page to the back to look at it. I always check. That's how you verify the quality of that paragraph. Like, have they accurately captured like what is in the table? Are they seeing the right things from this, data set or, table that they're incorporating? Have they taken the correct lessons? Is there misunderstanding, misinterpretation? Is it about the economics? Is it about the right? Anyway, so those are all the things that kind of bounce around when you're assessing the use of external resources for for grading purposes. But anyway, so that brings me kind of to the end here about my sort of overview video about how to write an economic analysis paper. Kind of the key overarching lesson that I'd say though is be sure to be using your own economic reasoning and try to focus this around at least 2 to 3 economic concepts from the course that you can apply. Notice from my list I came up with like 5, right? And there's even more besides that I could have used in that Tesla example. I don't want to take all of them, right? But the idea is like, even before you start writing, you should think about like, what are going to be the key concepts? What are the places where you're going to add value from your own reasoning? The way that I like to describe an economics paper or discussion post or whatever to students is I want to say, you know, now that you're in this course, how are you thinking about your analysis? How are you analyzing this example? How are you thinking about Tesla differently than you would have 6 months ago before you ever took the class, right? Over the, the previous summer, over the winter or whatever. Now that you're in this class, how are you thinking about, like, what tools do you have that you can bring to bear on this analysis? How do I know that this paper has been written by a student in an economics class rather than in any of the other, business or social sciences, right? So that's one of the kind of hallmarks you want to look for specifically when you're doing some type of exercise, paper, discussion that's going to require your own economic reasoning. Be sure that that's what you're including, right? Shouldn't think of these as like a scavenger hunt to go and find like, on Investopedia, what's the supply and demand model or whatever, or find a textbook or something along those lines. No. The whole point of the assignment is capturing your own economic reasoning. So that's for sure what you want to showcase in the paper. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the video. Good luck on your papers. I look forward to reading whichever ones are coming my way. So.